The sound of rustling hay in the dead of night wasn't something Benjamin Hayes expected to hear when he returned to his ranch outside Great Bend, Kansas, in the spring of 1874. He just finished checking on his cattle, making sure none had wandered too far from the property line, and the barn should have been empty except for his 2 horses. Benjamin stood perfectly still in the doorway, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip, listening to the soft movements coming from the hayloft above. "I know you're up there," he called out, his voice firm but not aggressive. "You've got about 10 seconds to show yourself before I come up." The rustling stopped. Silence stretched between them like a taut rope ready to snap. Benjamin was about to make good on his promise when a small voice drifted down. "Please don't shoot. I'm unarmed." It was a woman's voice, rough with thirst and exhaustion. Benjamin's grip on his weapon loosened slightly, though he didn't let go entirely. In these parts, trust could get a man killed, but something in that voice told him this wasn't a threat. "Come down where I can see you," he said, taking a step back to give her room. "Slow and easy." He heard hesitant movement, then saw a pair of worn boots appearing on the ladder. The woman descended carefully, and when she finally turned to face him, Benjamin felt his breath catch despite himself. She was covered in dust and hay, her dark hair falling loose from what had once been a proper bun, and her dress was torn at the hem. But it was her eyes that struck him most dark green and filled with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, and she looked like she hadn't eaten in days. "I'm sorry for trespassing," she said, lifting her chin even as she swayed slightly on her feet. "I'll leave if you want, but I'm asking you as a Christian man to let me stay just for tonight. I'll be gone before sunrise." Benjamin studied her for a long moment. Her hands were trembling, whether from fear or weakness he couldn't tell. Her dress, though dirty and damaged, had once been a quality garment, suggesting she came from some means. Whatever had brought her to his hayloft, it wasn't ordinary circumstances. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked instead of answering her question. She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the day before, I've lost track." Benjamin holstered his gun and gestured toward the barn door. "Come on to the house. You can tell me your story over some food." "I don't need your charity," she said quickly, pride flashing in those green eyes. "I just need a safe place to sleep." "Wasn't offering charity," Benjamin replied. "Was offering hospitality. There's a difference. Besides, you look like you're about to fall over, and I don't want to have to carry you to the house if you faint." Despite everything, the corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I don't faint." "Good. Then you can walk to the house yourself and eat something. Come on." He didn't wait for her to argue further, just turned and headed toward the small ranch house he'd built with his own hands 3 years ago. After a moment, he heard her following, her footsteps unsteady but determined. Inside, Benjamin lit a few lamps and gestured for her to sit at the simple wooden table while he stoked the fire in the stove. He put on a pot of coffee and pulled out some bread, cold chicken, and preserves from his larder. It wasn't much, but it was what he had. He set the food in front of her and poured 2 cups of coffee. She stared at the food for a moment, and he could see her battling between pride and hunger. Hunger won. She picked up the bread with shaking hands and took a small, controlled bite, clearly trying to maintain some dignity despite her circumstances. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." Benjamin sat down across from her, cradling his coffee cup in both hands. "I'm Benjamin Hayes. This is my ranch." She swallowed her bite of bread and met his eyes. "Prudence Jensen." "Well, Miss Jensen, you want to tell me what brought you to my hayloft in the middle of the night?" Prudence set down her bread and wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup as if drawing strength from it. I'm running from my stepfather. He wants to force me into a marriage with a man named Marcus Webb. Do you know him? Benjamin's jaw tightened. He knew Webb, a wealthy cattle buyer who'd made his fortune through questionable means and had a reputation for cruelty. The man was nearly 50 and had already buried 2 wives under mysterious circumstances. I know of him, Benjamin said carefully. Not the kind of man I'd care to do business with. Not the kind of man anyone should have to marry, Prudence said, a slight tremor in her voice. But my stepfather owes Webb money from gambling debts, a lot of money, and Webb offered to forgive the debt if my stepfather would give him my hand in marriage. Your stepfather agreed. Benjamin couldn't keep the disgust from his voice. He did. Told me it was my duty as a daughter to save the family from ruin. Prudence's hands tightened around the cup. The wedding was supposed to be tomorrow. I ran 3 days ago. Benjamin sat back in his chair, processing this information. Where's your mother in all this? Dead. She passed 2 years ago from fever. That's when my stepfather started gambling heavily. I think he was trying to drown his grief, but it just made everything worse. Prudence took a sip of coffee, her eyes distant. I tried to talk to Webb myself, to ask him to give us time to pay back the debt another way, but he just laughed. Said he'd been watching me for months and decided he wanted a young, pretty wife to warm his bed. The crude directness of the statement made Benjamin's hands clench into fists. You can't go back there, I know, but I can't stay here either. Webb has men looking for me. I saw 2 of them ride through Great Bend this afternoon asking questions. That's why I hid in your barn. I was going to wait until dark and then move on, but I must have fallen asleep. I'm so tired. Where were you planning to go? Prudence looked down at her hands. I don't know. Somewhere far enough away that Webb can't find me. Maybe Colorado. I have a cousin in Denver, but I don't know if she'd take me in. We haven't spoken in years. Benjamin stood and paced to the window, looking out at the dark Kansas plains. His mind was working through possibilities, each one presenting its own set of problems. If he sent her on her way, she'd likely be caught within a day or 2. Webb's men would be watching the roads, the stage stations, the train depot in town. A woman traveling alone would be noticed and remembered. You could stay here, he heard himself say. Prudence's head snapped up. What? Benjamin turned from the window, surprised at his own words but growing more certain as he spoke. Webb's men don't know me. I keep to myself mostly, just work my ranch. They wouldn't think to look here. You could stay until we figure out a more permanent solution. I couldn't impose on you like that, Prudence said, even as hope flickered in her eyes. And if they did find me here, you'd be in danger too. Webb isn't a forgiving man. Let me worry about Webb, Benjamin said, returning to the table. I've dealt with worse than him. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. It was a fair question. Benjamin considered it, looking at this woman who'd stumbled into his life with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce determination to control her own fate. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And because no woman should be forced into marriage against her will, especially not to a man like Marcus Webb. Prudence's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. You're a good man, Mr. Hayes. Benjamin. Just Benjamin. He stood and gestured toward the small second room in his house. That's my room, but you can have it tonight. I'll sleep out here by the fire. Tomorrow we can figure out better arrangements. I can't take your bed, Prudence protested. You can and you will. You look dead on your feet and I'm used to sleeping rough. It's settled. This time, Prudence was too exhausted to argue. She finished her food, thanked him again, and disappeared into the bedroom. Benjamin heard the door close softly, then the creak of the bed frame as she lay down. Within minutes, the house was silent. Benjamin settled into his chair by the fire, his coffee growing cold in his hands as he stared into the flames. He'd lived alone on this ranch for 3 years now, ever since he'd saved up enough from his work as a trail hand to buy this piece of land and build something of his own. He was 28 years old, and in all that time, he'd never brought a woman to his house. He'd courted a girl back in Missouri before coming to Kansas, but she'd chosen to marry a shopkeeper with steadier prospects. Benjamin had accepted it and moved on, pouring his energy into building his ranch instead. Now here was Prudence Jensen, sleeping in his bed, and Benjamin had a feeling his quiet, solitary life was about to get a lot more complicated. The next morning, Benjamin woke to the smell of coffee brewing. He sat up from his makeshift bed on the floor, disoriented for a moment before remembering the previous night's events. He stood and saw Prudence at his stove, carefully managing the fire as she cooked something in his cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I hope you don't mind. I found some eggs and bacon. I wanted to repay your kindness with at least one decent meal." Benjamin rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." She turned back to the stove, and Benjamin noticed she'd done her best to clean up. Her hair was properly pinned again, and though her dress was still torn and dusty, she'd brushed it out as best she could. "Besides, I'm not the type to accept help without giving something in return. If I'm going to stay here, even temporarily, I need to earn my keep." They ate breakfast together, a strangely domestic scene that felt both comfortable and surreal. Prudence asked about the ranch, and Benjamin found himself talking more than he usually did, explaining how he raised cattle and horses, how he'd slowly built up his herd, how he hoped to expand in the coming years. "It sounds like you've worked very hard," Prudence said. "You should be proud." "It's honest work," Benjamin replied. "That's all I ever wanted, a place of my own where I could make my own way." "I understand that," Prudence said softly. "That's all I want too, the freedom to make my own choices, to live my own life." Their eyes met across the table, and Benjamin felt something shift in his chest. This woman wasn't just pretty, though she certainly was that. She had strength in her, a core of steel wrapped in silk. She'd risked everything to escape a fate she didn't want, and she wasn't asking for anyone to rescue her, just for a little help while she found her footing. A knock at the door shattered the moment. They both froze, eyes wide. Benjamin stood slowly, gesturing for Prudence to move into the bedroom. She went quickly and quietly, closing the door behind her. Benjamin took a breath to steady himself and opened the front door. Two men stood on his porch, both wearing dusty trail clothes and hard expressions. One was tall and lean with a scar running down his left cheek. The other was shorter and stockier, with mean little eyes that darted around, taking in everything. "Help you gentlemen?" Benjamin asked, keeping his voice casual. "Morning," the scarred man said. "We're looking for someone. A young woman, dark hair, green eyes, about so tall." He held his hand up to indicate Prudence's height. "Goes by the name of Prudence Jensen. You seen anyone matching that description?" "Can't say I have," Benjamin said, leaning against the door frame as if he had all the time in the world. "I live pretty isolated out here. Don't see many folks passing through. What's she done?" "That's between us and her," the stocky man said, his tone aggressive. "You sure you haven't seen her? There's a reward for information leading to her return." "I'm sure. Like I said, I haven't seen anyone." "You might try in town. Ask at the general store or the saloon. Folks there see a lot more traffic than I do." The scarred man studied Benjamin's face for a long moment, as if trying to detect a lie. Benjamin met his gaze steadily, his expression open and unconcerned. Finally, the man nodded. "We'll do that. If you do happen to see her, you can find us at the hotel in Great Bend. Mr. Webb is offering $100 for her safe return." "I'll keep that in mind," Benjamin said. Good luck with your search." He watched as the two men mounted their horses and rode away, waiting until they were just specks on the horizon before closing the door. Prudence emerged from the bedroom, her face pale. "They'll be back," she said. "Once they ask around town and find out I haven't been seen there, they'll start searching the outlying ranches more thoroughly." "Maybe," Benjamin agreed, "but that buys us some time to think." He paced the room, his mind working. "We need a story. A reason for you to be here that won't raise suspicions." "What kind of story?" Benjamin stopped pacing and looked at her, an idea forming. "We could say your family, a cousin from back east, come to help me run the ranch." Prudence considered this. "That might work for a little while, but Webb knows I don't have family in Kansas. He made my stepfather give him a complete accounting of all my relatives before he agreed to the marriage." Her voice was bitter. "He wanted to make sure I had nowhere to run. Then we need something else. Something that would make it improper for Webb's men to bother you." Benjamin ran a hand through his hair, thinking. What if we said we were engaged? The words hung in the air between them. Prudence's eyes widened. Engaged. "Think about it," Benjamin said, warming to the idea despite its audacity. "If we say we've been courting by letter for months and you just arrived to marry me, that would explain your presence here. And Webb couldn't very well force you to marry him if you're already promised to someone else." "But Webb could check. He could ask in town if anyone knew about an engagement." "We'd have to make it convincing," Benjamin admitted. "We'd need to actually go through with it. Get married, I mean, at least on paper." Prudence sat down heavily in a chair, staring at him in disbelief. "You're suggesting we actually get married, to people we don't even know, to protect me from a forced marriage?" When she put it that way, it did sound absurd. Benjamin sat down across from her. "I know it's a lot to ask, and I know we just met, but think about it practically. If you're my wife, legally married, Webb has no claim on you. Your stepfather's debt to him would be his own problem, not yours. You'd be free." "And what would you get out of this arrangement?" Prudence asked quietly. Benjamin hadn't thought that far ahead. He looked at this woman who'd crashed into his life less than 12 hours ago and tried to imagine what it would mean to have her here permanently. "Companionship, I suppose. Someone to share the work and the life. It gets lonely out here. And you seem like someone I could talk to, someone with sense and strength." "That's not exactly a declaration of love," Prudence said, but there was no mockery in her tone, just a kind of sad understanding. "No," Benjamin agreed, "but maybe that's not the worst foundation for a marriage. We'd go into it honestly, knowing what it is and what it isn't. We could make it a partnership. You'd have your freedom and safety, and I'd have help with the ranch and a companion. We could build something good together, even if it's not built on romance." Prudence was quiet for a long time, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. Benjamin waited, barely breathing, realizing with some surprise how much he wanted her to say yes. Not just because he wanted to help her, but because the thought of her leaving of his house, returning to its usual lonely silence, was suddenly unbearable. "I would need conditions," Prudence finally said. "Name them." "Separate sleeping arrangements. We barely know each other. I won't be rushed into intimacy." "Agreed," Benjamin said without hesitation. "You can keep the bedroom. I'll rig up something in the loft or build an addition to the house. And I want to contribute to the ranch. Really contribute, not just cook and clean. I want to learn the work, to be a true partner in this enterprise." "I'd welcome the help," Benjamin said honestly. "I could use an extra pair of hands, especially during calving season and roundup. And if either of us decides this isn't working, we should be free to end it. I won't trap you in a marriage you don't want any more than I'd want to be trapped myself." Benjamin extended his hand across the table. "You have my word. This is a partnership, not a prison, for either of us." Prudence looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then placed her smaller hand in his. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work, despite her obvious genteel upbringing. "Then I accept your proposal, Benjamin Hayes. And I accept your acceptance, Prudence Jensen." He shook her hand solemnly, then couldn't help a small smile. "Though I suppose we should probably have this conversation again in front of witnesses, in a slightly more romantic fashion." For the first time since he'd met her, Prudence laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound that seemed to light up the whole room. "I suppose that would be more conventional." They spent the rest of the day planning. Benjamin would ride into Great Bend the next morning and speak with Reverend Matthews about performing a marriage ceremony. They'd need at least one witness, preferably more, to make it legally binding. Benjamin suggested asking the Reverend and his wife, along with the general store owner who Benjamin knew casually from his supply runs. That afternoon, Benjamin took Prudence around the ranch, showing her the layout of the land, introducing her to his cattle and horses. She had a natural way with animals, he noticed. The horses didn't shy from her, and even his most temperamental mare let Prudence stroke her nose without fuss. "We had horses when I was young," Prudence explained when Benjamin commented on it. "Before my father died and my mother remarried, I used to ride every day." There was a wistfulness in her voice, a longing for a simpler time. "You can ride here whenever you want," Benjamin said. "In fact, if you're going to help with the cattle, you'll need to learn to ride Western style if you don't already know how." "I'd like that," Prudence said, smiling up at him. "I'd like that very much." That evening they sat together on the porch as the sun set over the Kansas plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The spring air was cool but not cold, and Benjamin had brought out an extra blanket for Prudence to wrap around her shoulders. "Are you scared?" she asked suddenly. About getting married to a stranger, Benjamin considered the question honestly. "A little," he admitted. "But I've taken bigger risks for less certain rewards. This feels right somehow. Does that make sense?" "It does," Prudence said softly. "I feel it too. Like maybe this was meant to happen, even if it's happening in the strangest possible way." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Benjamin found himself acutely aware of Prudence's presence beside him, the soft sound of her breathing, the faint scent of the lavender soap she'd found in his wash basin and used to clean up. "Tell me about your family," Prudence said. "Your real family, I mean." "Not much to tell," Benjamin said. "My father was a farmer in Missouri, good man, hard worker, but the land wasn't kind to him. He passed when I was 16. My mother remarried a year later, a widower with 3 children of his own. They didn't need another mouth to feed, so I struck out on my own. Worked cattle drives, saved my money, learned the trade. When I had enough, I came to Kansas and bought this land. You still talk to your mother, sometimes. I write to her a few times a year and she writes back. She seems happy enough with her new family. I'm glad for her." "Any siblings of your own?" "A sister. Emma. She married a banker in St. Louis. We exchanged letters at Christmas." Benjamin paused. "What about you? Any brothers or sisters?" "No, I was an only child. My mother always said I was her miracle baby. She'd almost given up hope of having children when I came along." Prudence's voice grew thick with emotion. "She was a wonderful mother, kind and patient and smart. I still miss her every day." "She'd be proud of you," Benjamin said. "Of your courage." "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being brave or just foolish." There's a difference between foolishness and courage. Foolishness is taking risks without thinking. Courage is being afraid but doing what you have to do anyway. You're not foolish, Prudence." She turned to look at him, her green eyes luminous in the starlight. Thank you, Benjamin, for everything, for taking me in, for offering me this solution, for treating me with kindness and respect when you didn't have to. You're easy to be kind to, he said, and meant it. They stayed on the porch until the night grew too cold to be comfortable, then went inside. Prudence retired to the bedroom, and Benjamin made his bed by the fire again, his mind too full of thoughts to allow for easy sleep. Tomorrow, he'd ride into town and set in motion events that would change his life forever. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, he felt a strange sense of peace, as if he'd been waiting for this moment without knowing it. The next morning, Benjamin rose early and dressed in his best clothes, a clean white shirt, black vest, and the good trousers he usually saved for church. Prudence emerged from the bedroom wearing the same torn dress from the night she'd arrived, and Benjamin felt a flash of guilt. Of course she had nothing else to wear. "We'll get you some new clothes in town," he said. "A dress suitable for a wedding at least." "I can't let you spend money on me like that," Prudence protested. "You're about to become my wife. If I can't buy you a wedding dress, what kind of husband would I be?" The word husband seemed to startle them both. It was one thing to agree to marriage in principle, another to start using the words that made it real. But Prudence didn't argue further, just nodded and thanked him quietly. They rode into Great Bend together, Prudence sitting behind Benjamin on his horse since he only had the one saddle. The town was bustling with morning activity when they arrived, farmers bringing in goods to sell, women shopping for supplies, men gathering outside the saloon even at this early hour. Benjamin felt Prudence tense behind him as they rode down Main Street. "It's all right," he murmured. "Stay close to me." He stopped first at the general store where Mrs. Carson, the owner's wife, helped Prudence select a simple but pretty dress in pale blue cotton, along with some underthings and a second everyday dress. Benjamin paid without complaint, ignoring Prudence's embarrassment at having him purchase her undergarments. "Needs must, Mrs. Carson said kindly, seeming to sense Prudence's discomfort. "You're a lucky girl to have found such a generous man." "I know," Prudence said, and the sincerity in her voice made Benjamin's chest tighten. Next, they visited Reverend Matthews at the small church on the edge of town. The Reverend was a kind man in his 50s with gentle eyes and a warm smile. He welcomed them into his modest home, where his wife served them coffee and pound cake. "So," the Reverend said, settling into his chair, "you mentioned in your note that you wanted to discuss a marriage ceremony." "Yes, sir," Benjamin said. "This is Prudence Jensen. We'd like to be married as soon as possible." Mrs. Matthews's eyes lit up with romantic interest. "How wonderful! How long have you been courting?" Benjamin and Prudence exchanged a quick glance. "We've been writing to each other for several months," Prudence said smoothly, the lie coming easier than Benjamin expected. "But we only met in person a few days ago. I came from back east to see if we suited as well in person as we did in letters." "And do you?" the Reverend asked, smiling. "We do," Benjamin said firmly, reaching over to take Prudence's hand. She laced her fingers through his, and the gesture felt natural despite its newness. "Well, normally I'd counsel a longer courtship," Reverend Matthews said. "But you're both of age, and if you're certain this is what you want, I'd be happy to perform the ceremony." "When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow, if possible," Benjamin said. "I know it's quick, but we're sure." The Reverend studied them both for a long moment, and Benjamin wondered if the man could sense the desperation underlying their request. But finally, the Reverend nodded. "Tomorrow afternoon, then. Say 2 o'clock. That will give me time to prepare and give you time to make any arrangements you need." "That's perfect," Prudence said, her voice warm with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Reverend. We'll need witnesses," Mrs. Matthews added. I'll stand for you, of course, and we can ask the Carsons if you'd like. They're such good people." "That would be wonderful," Benjamin said. As they left the church, Prudence was quiet, her expression thoughtful. Benjamin helped her back onto the horse, and they were about to head back to the ranch when a voice stopped them cold. Well, if it isn't Prudence Jensen." They turned to see Marcus Webb standing outside the hotel, flanked by his 2 hired men. Webb was a large man running to fat, with thinning hair and small, calculating eyes. He wore expensive clothes that fit poorly, making him look like a child playing dress up in his father's wardrobe. "Mr. Webb," Prudence said, her voice steady despite the fear Benjamin could feel in her trembling frame behind him. "Your stepfather is very worried about you," Webb said, walking closer. "You ran away just days before our wedding. That was very rude, my dear." "I'm not your dear," Prudence said, "and there's not going to be any wedding." Webb's face darkened. "Your stepfather signed a contract. You belong to me." "A person can't belong to another person, Mr. Webb," Benjamin said, his voice hard. "And the lady's made it clear she doesn't want to marry you." Webb's attention shifted to Benjamin, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" "Benjamin Hayes. I own a ranch outside of town." "Is this the man you've been hiding with?" Webb demanded, looking back at Prudence. "Have you been living in sin with this cowboy?" "We're engaged," Prudence said quickly. "We're getting married tomorrow." The words hit Webb like a physical blow. His face turned purple with rage. "You can't be engaged to him. You're engaged to me." "I never agreed to marry you," Prudence said. "My stepfather made that deal without my consent. It's not legal or binding." "I paid good money for you," Webb snarled, all pretense of civility dropping away. "Your stepfather owes me and I'm collecting. You're coming with me right now." He reached for Prudence, but Benjamin moved his horse, putting himself between Webb and Prudence. "Touch her and you'll regret it," he said quietly. Webb's hand moved to the gun at his hip, but before the situation could escalate further, Reverend Matthews appeared on the church steps. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" the Reverend called out, his voice carrying authority despite his gentle nature. Webb's hand dropped from his weapon. He wouldn't risk shooting a man in front of a preacher in broad daylight, no matter how angry he was. But the look he gave Benjamin promised future violence. "This isn't over," Webb said. "I have a legal contract with her stepfather." "Then I suggest you take that up with her stepfather," Benjamin said. "Miss Jensen is under my protection now and she's made her choice clear. Tomorrow she'll be my wife and there's nothing you can do about it." "We'll see about that," Webb said. He gestured to his men and the 3 of them stalked back into the hotel. Benjamin didn't relax until they were well away from town, riding back toward the ranch. Prudence's arms were tight around his waist and he could feel her shaking. "That was too close," she said. "Benjamin, he's not going to let this go. He might try to stop the wedding or come after us at the ranch." "Let him try," Benjamin said grimly. "Tomorrow you'll be my wife, legally and properly. After that, he has no claim on you whatsoever." That night, Benjamin made preparations. He cleaned and loaded his rifle, checked his revolvers, and made sure all the doors and windows were secure. Prudence watched him work, her face pale but determined. "I'm sorry I brought this danger to your door," she said. "You didn't bring anything I couldn't handle," Benjamin replied. "And tomorrow we make this official. You'll be Prudence Hayes and Webb can choke on his contracts." Despite the tension, Prudence smiled. "Prudence Hayes, that has a nice sound to it." "It does," Benjamin agreed and realized he meant it. They spent the evening in quiet conversation, learning more about each other. Prudence told him about her childhood, about the books she loved to read, about her mother's garden and her father's stories. Benjamin told her about his years on the cattle drives, about the places he'd seen and the people he'd met, about his dreams for the ranch. I want to build something lasting, he said. Something I can be proud of, a place where a family could thrive. A family, Prudence repeated softly. Do you want children? Benjamin met her eyes. Someday, yes, do you? I always imagined having children, Prudence admitted. A whole house full of them, running and playing and filling the place with noise and life. She looked down at her hands. But I understand if that's not part of our arrangement. I know this is a marriage of convenience. It doesn't have to stay that way, Benjamin said carefully. I mean, we're starting as strangers, yes. But people have built good marriages on less. We get along well. We make each other laugh. We want similar things from life. That's more than a lot of couples have. Are you saying you think this could become a real marriage, in every sense? I'm saying I'm not opposed to the possibility, but there's no rush. We take things at whatever pace feels right for both of us. Fair, fair, Prudence agreed, and the smile she gave him was tinged with something that might have been hope. They retired early, both needing rest before the next day's events. Benjamin lay by the fire, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, and thought about the woman sleeping in the next room who would be his wife in less than 24 hours. It seemed impossible that his life had changed so dramatically in just a few days, but he couldn't find it in himself to regret it. Prudence was a gift he hadn't known he was looking for, and he was determined to be worthy of her trust. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for a wedding. Benjamin rose early and did his chores, feeding the animals and checking the property line for any sign of Webb or his men. Everything was quiet. When he returned to the house, he found Prudence already awake, her new blue dress laid out carefully on the bed. She'd washed her hair and was attempting to pin it up in an elaborate style, but her hands were shaking too badly to manage it. "Let me help," Benjamin said, surprising them both. "You know how to do a lady's hair. I had a sister, remember, and a mother. I learned a thing or two." He wasn't as skilled as a lady's maid would be, but he managed to help her create a simple but elegant style, pinning it securely. His fingers brushed against the soft skin of her neck, and he felt her shiver slightly at the contact. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're beautiful," he said, and meant it. Even in the simple cotton dress with her hair simply styled, Prudence was lovely. But it was more than her physical appearance that drew him. It was the strength in her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the way she faced life's challenges head-on. They rode into town together, both nervous and excited. The church was small but well kept, and Reverend Matthews had decorated it with wildflowers from the prairie. Mrs. Matthews was there, along with Mr. and Mrs. Carson from the general store. A few other townspeople had gathered as well, drawn by the news of a wedding. Benjamin helped Prudence down from the horse, and she clung to his arm as they walked into the church. Her hand was cold in his, and he squeezed it gently, trying to offer reassurance. The ceremony was simple but moving. Reverend Matthews spoke about the sacred nature of marriage, about partnership and commitment and choosing to build a life together. When it came time for the vows, Benjamin spoke clearly and firmly. "I, Benjamin Hayes, take you, Prudence Jensen, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you, to provide for you, to respect you, and to be a faithful partner to you for all the days of my life." Prudence's voice was softer but no less sincere. "I, Prudence Jensen, take you, Benjamin Hayes, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you, to share in your burdens and your joys, to be a faithful partner to you for all the days of my life." The Reverend produced 2 simple gold bands, which Benjamin had purchased that morning before Prudence woke. They exchanged rings, and Benjamin felt the weight of the band on his finger, solid and real. "By the power vested in me by the state of Kansas and by God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Benjamin, you may kiss your bride." Benjamin turned to Prudence, seeing his own mixture of joy and nervousness reflected in her eyes. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she didn't. Their lips met in a chaste, gentle kiss that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through Benjamin's entire body. When they pulled apart, Prudence's cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Matthews announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Hayes." The small congregation applauded and Mrs. Matthews hugged them both. "You make a beautiful couple," she said warmly. "I wish you every happiness." They signed the marriage certificate, witnessed by the Reverend and the Carsons, making it legal and official. Prudence Jensen was now Prudence Hayes, and no contract Webb had with her stepfather could change that. As they left the church, Benjamin saw Webb standing across the street, watching with murder in his eyes. But he was alone, his hired men nowhere in sight, and he made no move to approach them. Benjamin wrapped his arm around Prudence's waist, a gesture that was part protective, part possessive, and part simple affection. They climbed onto the horse together, and this time when Prudence put her arms around him, it felt different. She was his wife now. That meant something. They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon sunshine, and Benjamin felt like he was seeing everything with new eyes. This was his land, his home, and now it was Prudence's too. She was part of it, part of him, bound together in the eyes of God and the law. When they reached the house, Benjamin helped her down from the horse and on impulse swept her up into his arms. Prudence gasped in surprise. "What are you doing, carrying you over the threshold?" Benjamin said. "It's tradition, isn't it?" Prudence laughed, that same warm, genuine sound that made Benjamin's heart lift. "I suppose it is." He carried her into the house and set her down gently in the main room. For a moment they just stood there, looking at each other, the reality of what they'd done settling over them like a warm blanket. "We're married," Prudence said, sounding slightly dazed. "We are," Benjamin confirmed. "How do you feel?" "Safe," Prudence said immediately. "For the first time in months I feel safe and happy." "Is that strange?" "No," Benjamin said. "I feel happy too, and it's not strange at all." They spent the rest of the day settling into their new reality as husband and wife. Prudence insisted on cooking a special dinner to celebrate, and Benjamin helped her, working side by side in the small kitchen. They laughed and talked, bumping into each other in the confined space, and it felt easy and natural. Over dinner, they made plans for the future. Prudence wanted to learn to ride properly so she could help with the cattle. Benjamin wanted to build an addition to the house, giving them more space and a proper bedroom for himself. They talked about planting a garden in the spring, about maybe getting some chickens, about all the small details that make up a life. As the sun set, however, a nervousness crept in. They'd agreed on separate sleeping arrangements, and Benjamin had meant it when he said there'd be no pressure. But now, on their wedding night, he couldn't help but feel the weight of expectations, both social and personal. Prudence seemed to sense his thoughts. "Benjamin," she said softly, "about tonight." "Nothing has to happen," he said quickly. "We agreed to take things slow, and I meant that. You take the bedroom like always. I'll be perfectly comfortable out here." "I know you would be," Prudence said, "but I was thinking, maybe we could talk a bit longer. I'm not quite ready to sleep yet, and I'd like the company." Relief washed over Benjamin. "I'd like that too." They moved to the porch again, their spot from the previous nights, and sat together in the cooling evening air. The stars were coming out, brilliant against the darkening sky. "You regret it?" Prudence asked suddenly. "Marrying me?" "No," Benjamin said without hesitation. "Do you regret marrying me?" "No. I just wanted to make sure you didn't feel trapped. I know you did this primarily to help me, and I don't want you to wake up one day and resent me for it." Benjamin turned to face her. "Prudence, I'm going to be honest with you. Yes, I offered to marry you to help you, but that's not the only reason I went through with it. Somewhere between finding you in my hayloft and standing at that altar today, this became real for me. I want this marriage to work. I want us to build a good life together. And I think we can if we're both willing to try. Prudence's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I want that too. I barely know you, but what I do know I like very much. You're kind and honest and strong. You make me feel safe, but you also make me feel seen. Like I matter as a person, not just as a pretty face or a valuable commodity. You do matter, Benjamin said fiercely. You matter a great deal, Prudence Hayes. The use of her new name made her smile despite her tears. Prudence Hayes, she repeated. I'm still getting used to that. You've got time, Benjamin said. We both do. We've got all the time in the world. They sat together for a long while, comfortable in each other's silence, before finally retiring for the night. Prudence went to the bedroom and Benjamin made his bed by the fire. But before she closed the door, she paused and looked back at him. Thank you, Benjamin, for everything. I know I say that a lot, but I mean it. You've given me my life back. You've given me something too, Benjamin said. I just didn't know I was missing it until you showed up. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Benjamin taught Prudence how to ride Western style, and she took to it quickly, her natural skill with horses serving her well. She learned how to rope cattle, how to mend fences, how to check the animals for signs of illness or injury. Benjamin was impressed by her willingness to learn and her lack of complaint about the hard work. In turn, Prudence brought life to the ranch house. She planted flowers around the porch, organized his chaotic pantry, and cooked meals that were far superior to anything Benjamin had managed on his own. She sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs, and the sound filled the house with warmth. They talked constantly, learning each other's quirks and habits, sharing stories and dreams. Benjamin discovered that Prudence had a sharp wit and a love of wordplay. Prudence learned that Benjamin had a quiet sense of humor and a deep well of patience. At night, they still maintained separate sleeping arrangements, but the bedroom door stayed open now, and they often talked across the distance until one or both of them fell asleep mid-conversation. 5 days after their wedding, Benjamin was working on repairing a section of fence when he saw riders approaching. He recognized Webb's hired men immediately. Setting down his tools, he walked back to the house where Prudence was hanging laundry. "Go inside," he said quietly. "We've got company." Prudence didn't argue, just gathered the laundry basket and disappeared into the house. Benjamin waited by the porch as the two men rode up. "Hayes," the scarred man said, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About your wife. Mr. Webb wants to make you an offer." "I'm not interested in any offers from Webb." The stocky man leaned forward in his saddle. "You don't even want to hear what he's proposing. He's willing to pay you $500. That's a lot of money for a dirt farmer." "I raise cattle, not crops," Benjamin said evenly. "And my wife isn't for sale." "Come on now, be reasonable," the scarred man said. "You married her to protect her, we get that. Noble and all. But $500 could go a long way toward improving this place, and it's not like you even know her. You've been married, what, a week?" "That's hardly a real marriage." "It's real enough," Benjamin said. "And legal. Whatever contract Webb thinks he has with her stepfather doesn't matter anymore. Prudence made her choice, and I'm standing by it." The stocky man's hand moved toward his gun. "Maybe you need some encouragement to see reason." In one smooth motion, Benjamin drew his own revolver faster than either man expected. "I wouldn't," he said calmly. "Now, you gentlemen are going to turn those horses around and ride back to town. You're going to tell Webb that if he comes near my wife again, I'll see him in court for harassment. And if he sends you back here, I won't be as polite next time." The two men exchanged glances. Finally, the scarred man nodded. "You're making a mistake, Hayes. Webb doesn't like to lose." "Then he'd better get used to the feeling," Benjamin said. He didn't lower his gun until the men were out of sight. Only then did he holster the weapon and turn to find Prudence standing in the doorway. "I'm sorry," she said. "I keep bringing trouble to you." Benjamin climbed the porch steps and took her hands in his. "You're my wife. Your troubles are my troubles. That's what marriage means. Besides, I can handle Webb and his hired thugs." "I know you can," Prudence said, "but I still worry. What if he escalates? What if he tries to hurt you to get to me?" "Then I'll be ready," Benjamin said, "but I don't think it'll come to that. Webb's a bully, and bullies back down when they realize they can't win. He's lost, Prudence. He just doesn't know it yet." That night, as they sat together after dinner, Prudence was quieter than usual. Benjamin could tell something was weighing on her mind. "What is it?" he asked gently. Prudence was silent for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about what those men said today. About our marriage not being real because we've only known each other a short time." "We know that's not true," Benjamin said. "The length of time doesn't determine whether a marriage is real." "I know, but it made me think about what makes a marriage real. And I realized that for me, this already feels real. You feel real to me, Benjamin. This life we're building feels real. And I don't want to keep pretending we're just partners or friends when I'm starting to feel." She trailed off, but Benjamin's heart was racing. "Feel what?" Prudence turned to look at him, her green eyes bright in the lamplight. "I'm starting to have real feelings for you. Romantic feelings. I know it's only been a week and maybe it's too soon, or maybe I'm confusing gratitude with something else, but I don't think I am. I think I'm falling in love with you, Benjamin Hayes." Benjamin felt like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. He'd been feeling the same way, had been fighting it, telling himself it was too soon, too fast, too improbable. But hearing Prudence say the words gave him courage. "I don't think it's too soon," he said, reaching out to cup her face gently. "And I don't think you're confused. I think you're brave enough to say what I've been feeling too. I'm falling in love with you too, Prudence. Maybe I started the day I found you in my hayloft, or maybe it was when you laughed at my joke about carrying you over the threshold, or maybe it's been a gradual thing that's been building every day. But it's real. You're real. This is real." Prudence leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "So what do we do about it?" "We stop fighting it," Benjamin said. "We let ourselves feel what we're feeling. We make this marriage real in every way." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "If that's what you want." In answer, Prudence leaned forward and kissed him. It was different from their chaste wedding kiss, deeper, more passionate, full of promise and possibility. Benjamin pulled her closer, and she came willingly, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Prudence rested her forehead against his. "I want this to be real," she whispered. "I want us to be real." "Then we are," Benjamin said, "starting right now." That night, for the first time, Prudence didn't sleep alone in the bedroom. They moved slowly, carefully, both nervous and excited about this new chapter of their marriage. Benjamin was gentle and patient, and Prudence was brave and trusting. And together, they made their marriage complete in the eyes of both God and themselves. Afterward, lying together in the darkness, Prudence traced patterns on Benjamin's chest. "I never imagined," she said softly, "that running away from one marriage would lead me to the right one." "I never imagined," Benjamin replied, "that I'd find the woman I'd been waiting for hiding in my hayloft." They laughed together, the sound warm and intimate in the quiet night. And for the first time since his mother had remarried and he'd struck out on his own, Benjamin didn't feel alone. He had a partner, a wife, a love. He had Prudence. The next week passed in a haze of happiness. Benjamin found himself rushing through his morning chores so he could get back to the house, to Prudence. They worked together during the day and held each other at night, and every moment felt like a gift. On the 8th day after their wedding, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was an older man, well-dressed, with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "Mr. Hayes?" the marshal asked as Benjamin came out to meet him. "That's right. What can I do for you, Marshal? I'm Marshal Garrett from the county seat. I've had a complaint filed by a Mr. Marcus Webb regarding your wife." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "What kind of complaint?" "He claims that you kidnapped Miss Prudence Jensen and forced her into marriage against her will. He's demanding that the marriage be annulled and that she be returned to his custody." "That's a lie," Benjamin said flatly. "My wife came to me of her own free will, and she married me of her own free will. We have a legal marriage certificate signed by Reverend Matthews and witnessed by upstanding members of the community." "I'd like to speak with your wife, if I may," Marshal Garrett said. "Just to verify her situation." "Of course." Benjamin turned and called toward the house. "Prudence, can you come out here, please?" Prudence emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw the marshal, her face went pale, but she held her ground. "Mrs. Hayes," the marshal said, tipping his hat. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I need to ask you some questions. Did your husband force you into marriage?" "No," Prudence said firmly. "I married Benjamin of my own free will, and you're currently living here by choice." "You're not being held against your will." "I'm here because I want to be," Prudence said. "Because I love my husband and this is my home." The marshal studied her face for a long moment. "Mr. Webb also claims that you were engaged to him first, and that this marriage is therefore invalid." "I was never engaged to Marcus Webb," Prudence said, her voice rising with anger. "My stepfather made a deal with Webb without my knowledge or consent, attempting to sell me to settle his gambling debts. I refused the arrangement and left. I met Benjamin and we fell in love and married." "That's the truth, Marshal, and I'll swear to it on a Bible if you need me to." Marshal Garrett relaxed slightly. "That won't be necessary, madam. I've dealt with Webb before and I had my suspicions about his version of events. But I had to check, you understand. It's my duty." "We understand," Benjamin said, putting his arm around Prudence. "And we appreciate you taking the time to investigate rather than just taking Webb's word for it." The marshal nodded. "I'll file my report stating that I found no evidence of wrongdoing." "Webb won't be happy, but there's nothing more he can do legally. You're married fair and square, and that's the end of it." He paused. "Though I'd watch your back for a while. Webb's not the type to let things go easily." "We'll be careful," Benjamin promised. After the marshal left, Prudence turned to Benjamin, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's really over. Webb can't force me to go with him." "It's really over," Benjamin confirmed. "You're my wife legally and completely. He has no claim on you." Prudence threw her arms around his neck, and Benjamin held her tight, feeling her relief and joy. "We're free," she whispered. "We can just be happy now." "That's the plan," Benjamin said, kissing the top of her head. They celebrated that night with a special dinner and dancing in the main room to music only they could hear. Benjamin spun Prudence around the small space, both of them laughing like children, giddy with relief and happiness. Later, as they lay in bed, Prudence said, "Benjamin, I want to write to my stepfather, not to reconcile, but to tell him that I'm all right and that I'm married. I don't want him to worry, even if he did try to sell me to Webb." "That's generous of you," Benjamin said, "after what he did." "I know. But he's still the man who raised me after my father died. I can't just hate him completely. And maybe if he knows I'm settled and happy, he'll leave us alone." "All right," Benjamin agreed. "We'll send the letter tomorrow." Prudence wrote the letter the next day, keeping it brief but honest. She explained that she'd married a good man, that she was happy and safe, and that she hoped her stepfather would respect her decision and her new life. She didn't mention the ranch's location or any details that might help Webb find them if he was still determined to cause trouble. They sent the letter via the postal service in Great Bend, and then tried to put the whole Webb situation behind them and focus on building their life together. As spring turned to early summer, Benjamin and Prudence fell into a comfortable routine. They worked the ranch together, and Prudence proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker. She could rope a steer almost as well as Benjamin now, and she'd taken charge of starting the vegetable garden, which was already showing promising green shoots. They made improvements to the property together. Benjamin built an addition to the house, creating a proper bedroom and a small storage room. Prudence made curtains for the windows and rugs for the floors, transforming the sparse bachelor dwelling into a real home. They also made friends in town. The Carsons became regular visitors, as did Reverend Matthews and his wife. Prudence joined the church's women's circle, and Benjamin participated in the local cattlemen's association. They were becoming part of the community, putting down roots. One evening, about 10 days after their wedding, Prudence had news that made Benjamin's heart soar. "I think I might be with child," she said shyly over dinner. Benjamin's fork clattered to his plate. "Really? Are you sure?" "Not completely sure yet. It's very early. But I've missed my monthly time and I've been feeling a bit queasy in the mornings. It could be something else, but—" She smiled. "I think it might be a baby." Benjamin came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby, Prudence, that's wonderful." "You're happy?" she asked, looking up at him with shining eyes. "I'm thrilled," he said honestly. "I know we've only been married a short time, but I can't think of anything I'd want more than to have a family with you." Prudence hugged him tight. "I'm happy too, and a little scared." "Is that normal?" "I think it's very normal," Benjamin said. "I'm scared too, but we'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else." Over the next weeks, it became clear that Prudence was indeed expecting. Her morning sickness got worse, though it usually passed by midday, and she developed a craving for pickled vegetables that Benjamin found both amusing and endearing. He rode into town and bought her every kind of pickle the general store had, just to see her smile. He was also more protective than ever, insisting she not do any heavy lifting and worrying whenever she climbed a ladder or got on a horse. Prudence tolerated his fussing with good humor, even when it got excessive. "Benjamin, I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she said one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. I know. I just want to make sure you're safe, both of you." "We're safe," Prudence said, touching his face gently. "You take such good care of us." 2 weeks after their wedding, on a warm June evening, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their favorite time of day, this quiet moment when the work was done and they could simply be together. "Can you believe it's been 2 weeks?" Prudence asked, leaning against Benjamin's shoulder. 2 weeks since what?" "Since we got married. 2 weeks ago I was Prudence Jensen, running from a forced marriage, hiding in your hayloft. Now I'm Prudence Hayes, married to a man I love, carrying his child, sitting on the porch of our home." It seems impossible that so much could change in such a short time. Benjamin wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "When you put it that way, it does seem pretty remarkable. 2 weeks ago, I was a lonely bachelor wondering if I'd ever find someone to share my life with. Now I have everything I never knew I wanted." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd turned me away that night?" Prudence asked. "If you told me to leave instead of offering me food and shelter?" "I try not to think about that," Benjamin admitted. It would have been the cautious thing to do, the safe thing, but I'm glad I didn't. You've made my life better in every possible way, Prudence. These have been the best 2 weeks of my life. Mine too, Prudence said softly. She turned to look up at him, her green eyes reflecting the orange and pink of the sunset. I love you, Benjamin Hayes. I know it's fast, and I know people would say 2 weeks isn't enough time to really know someone, but I don't care. I love you with everything I am. I love you too, Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. I love your courage and your strength and your kindness. I love the way you sing while you work and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love the way you look at the world, always finding the good in things. I love everything about you, Prudence. They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. And in that moment, Benjamin thought about the strange path that had brought them together, a woman fleeing a forced marriage, a man offering shelter to a stranger, a hasty wedding to solve a problem. None of it had been conventional or expected, but all of it had been right. 2 weeks. It had taken just 2 weeks for his entire life to change, for his empty house to become a home, for his solitary existence to become a partnership. 2 weeks from stranger to wife, from loneliness to love, from uncertainty to a future filled with possibility. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Benjamin held his wife close and thought about the child growing inside her, the life they were building together, the love that had bloomed so quickly and so completely between them. He thought about how close he'd come to missing all of this, how easily he could have sent her away that first night. But he hadn't. He'd taken a chance on a stranger in his hayloft, and she'd turned out to be everything he'd been searching for without knowing it. She'd been the answer to prayers he hadn't known how to pray, the missing piece that made his life complete. "What are you thinking about?" Prudence asked, nestling deeper into his embrace. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Benjamin said. "How lucky we both are. And I'm thinking about our future, about raising our child here, about growing old together on this land." "Tell me what you see," Prudence said. "When you imagine our future." Benjamin looked out over his land, their land, and let his imagination paint the picture. "I see us building this ranch into something really special. I see cattle grazing as far as the eye can see and horses running in the pasture. I see our child playing in the yard and maybe more children after that. I see us working side by side through all of it, supporting each other, loving each other. I see us sitting on this porch when we're old and gray, watching our grandchildren play and remembering the night we met, when you were hiding in my hayloft and I was too curious and too foolish to send you away." "That doesn't sound foolish at all," Prudence said. "That sounds perfect. That sounds like exactly the life I want." "Then that's the life we'll have," Benjamin promised. "Starting right now, right here, we build that future together." They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool and the stars were brilliant overhead. When they finally went inside, it was to a home filled with love and possibility, to a bed they shared as husband and wife, to a life that had begun in the most unexpected way, but had become more real and more right with each passing day. As Benjamin drifted off to sleep with Prudence in his arms, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the woman who'd hidden in his hayloft, for the courage to help her, for the unexpected love that had grown between them, and for the future they would build together. The months that followed were among the happiest of Benjamin's life. Prudence's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she complained good-naturedly about growing too large to see her feet and being unable to fit into any of her dresses properly. Benjamin thought she'd never been more beautiful, glowing with health and happiness as their child grew inside her. They prepared for the baby together, building a cradle from sturdy oak wood and sewing tiny clothes from soft cotton fabric. Mrs. Matthews and Mrs. Carson visited regularly, bringing gifts and advice, helping Prudence prepare for motherhood. In late November, on a cold but clear day, Prudence went into labor. Benjamin rode for the doctor in a panic, then spent the next 12 hours pacing the floor while the doctor and Mrs. Matthews attended to his wife. Prudence's cries of pain nearly drove him mad with worry, but there was nothing he could do but wait and pray. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, he heard a new sound, the strong, healthy cry of a baby. The doctor emerged from the bedroom, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Hayes, you have a son, a son." Benjamin felt tears spring to his eyes. "And my wife, is she all right?" "She's tired but healthy." "She did wonderfully. You can go in and see them now." Benjamin entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Prudence was propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in the blanket she'd sewn herself. "Benjamin," she said, her voice weary but filled with joy. "Come meet your son." He crossed to the bed and looked down at the small red face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small, snuffling sounds. Benjamin felt his heart expand in his chest, making room for this new love that threatened to overwhelm him. "He's perfect," Benjamin whispered. "You're both perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Prudence asked. Benjamin had never held a baby before, but he let Prudence guide his arms into the right position and carefully transferred the precious bundle into his embrace. The baby was so light, so small, so utterly dependent. Benjamin looked down at his son and made a silent vow to always protect him, to always provide for him, to be the best father he could possibly be. "What should we name him?" Prudence asked. They discussed names but hadn't settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Benjamin knew. "Thomas," he said. "After my father, Thomas Hayes." "Thomas," Prudence repeated, smiling. "I like that. Welcome to the world, Thomas Hayes." The baby chose that moment to open his eyes. They were a deep blue, though Benjamin knew they might change color, and seemed to look directly at his father. Benjamin felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Hello, Thomas," he said softly. "I'm your father. And I promise you, son, I'm going to do everything in my power to give you a good life. You're going to grow up knowing you're loved and wanted and valued. You're going to grow up free to make your own choices and follow your own path. And you're going to know that your mother is the bravest, strongest, most wonderful woman in the world." Prudence reached out and took Benjamin's hand, squeezing it gently. "And he's going to know that his father is the kindest, most honorable man alive." They spent the rest of that day as a family, marveling over every tiny feature of their son, watching him sleep and eat and make all the small sounds that newborns make. Benjamin had never felt more complete, more at peace, than he did in those quiet hours, watching his wife nurse their child, seeing the love in her eyes as she looked at their baby. That night, after Prudence and Thomas had both fallen asleep, Benjamin stepped out onto the porch for a moment of reflection. It was almost exactly 9 months since the night he'd found Prudence hiding in his hayloft. 9 months since his life had changed forever. He thought about how improbable it all was that she'd chosen his ranch to hide in, that he'd taken her in instead of sending her away, that they'd fallen in love so quickly and so completely. He thought about the hasty wedding, about standing up to Webb and his threats, about building a life together in such a short time. And now they had a son, a family, a future that stretched out before them, bright with promise and possibility. The door opened behind him and Prudence appeared, wrapped in a shawl. "What are you doing out here? It's freezing." "Just thinking," Benjamin said, pulling her into his arms. "You should be resting. Thomas is asleep, and I wanted to check on you. Today was overwhelming for both of us." Good overwhelming, though, Benjamin said. The best kind. They stood together in the cold night air, looking up at the stars. Do you remember, Prudence said, that first night when you found me? I was so scared, so desperate. I had no idea that you would turn out to be my salvation in every possible way. I had no idea that the woman in my hayloft would become my whole world, Benjamin replied. But here we are, Prudence echoed. Husband and wife, mother and father. A family. A family, Benjamin agreed. Everything I ever wanted and didn't know how to ask for. They went back inside to their sleeping son, to their warm home, to the life they'd built from the most unlikely beginning. And as Benjamin settled into bed next to his wife, his hand resting protectively on the cradle where his son slept, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a woman hiding in a hayloft and ended, or rather, began with a love story more powerful than anything he could have imagined. It had been fast, yes. Unconventional, certainly. But it had been real and true and right in every way that mattered. 2 weeks from stranger to wife. 9 months from hasty marriage to parenthood. And a lifetime of love stretching out before them, built on the foundation of trust and respect and genuine affection that had grown between them from the very start. As Benjamin drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was one of gratitude for the courage Prudence had shown in running from a life she didn't want, for his own decision to help a stranger in need, and for the love that had bloomed between them so unexpectedly and so completely. Their story had begun in a hayloft, but it would continue for years to come, filled with joy and challenges, triumphs and sorrows, but always anchored by the love they'd found in each other. Years passed on the ranch, and they were good years. Thomas grew into a strong, healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's quiet determination. When he was 3, they welcomed a daughter, Rebecca, who had Benjamin's dark hair and Prudence's fierce spirit. 2 years after that came another son, Daniel, who was the perfect blend of both his parents. The ranch prospered under Benjamin and Prudence's joint management. They expanded their cattle operation and developed a reputation for raising quality horses. Prudence proved to have a natural talent for breeding and training horses, and several wealthy ranchers came from as far away as Texas to buy from her stock. Through it all, their love continued to deepen and grow. They had their disagreements. Of course, what married couple didn't? But they always worked through them with honesty and respect. They never forgot those early days, when they'd barely known each other but had chosen to trust anyway. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Prudence back to Great Bend for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant. They left the children with Mrs. Matthews for the evening and dressed in their finest clothes over dessert. Prudence raised her glass of lemonade in a toast. To the man who found a desperate woman in his hayloft and gave her a home, a family, and a love she never dreamed possible. Benjamin clinked his glass against hers. To the woman who turned my lonely bachelor life into something more wonderful than I could have imagined. To my wife, my partner, my love. They drank, smiling at each other across the table with the easy affection of a couple who'd built something lasting and true. You ever think about what would have happened if things had gone differently? Prudence asked. If you'd sent me away, or if I'd chosen a different ranch to hide in? Sometimes, Benjamin admitted, but not in a way that makes me wish things were different, more in a way that makes me grateful for how things actually turned out. We took a huge risk, both of us. We could have made a terrible mistake, but we didn't. We didn't, Prudence agreed. We made the best decision of our lives. She paused, then added with a mischievous smile, though I do sometimes wish our courtship had been a bit longer. It would make for a more conventional story to tell our children. Benjamin laughed. Oh, I don't know. I think our story is pretty good as it is. Your mother was hiding in my hayloft. 2 weeks later she was my wife, and 9 months after that your brother was born. It's got drama, romance, and a happy ending. What more could you want?" "When you put it that way," Prudence said, laughing, "it does sound rather exciting." As the years continued to pass, the Hayes family became a fixture in the Great Bend community. Benjamin served on the town council and helped establish a school. Prudence started a lending library in their home, sharing her love of books with neighbors and their children. They weathered hard times, 2 droughts that threatened their cattle, a winter so harsh they lost part of their herd, the normal struggles of raising children and running a ranch. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from the solid foundation of love they'd built. Thomas grew into a fine young man who wanted to take over the ranch someday. Rebecca surprised them all by showing an aptitude for medicine and announced her intention to become a doctor. Daniel had his mother's way with horses and his father's business sense, and he talked about starting his own horse breeding operation when he was old enough. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered on the porch for a photograph. Benjamin stood behind Prudence, his hands on her shoulders, while their 3 children arranged themselves around them. The photographer's flash powder exploded, capturing the moment forever, a family united by love and strengthened by years of working and living together. That night, after the children were in bed, Benjamin and Prudence returned to their favorite spot on the porch, sitting together and watching the stars just as they had on so many nights before. 10 years, Prudence mused. It feels like both forever and no time at all. "I know what you mean," Benjamin said. "I can still remember the first moment I saw you climbing down from that hayloft like it was yesterday. But at the same time, I can barely remember what my life was like before you." "Quieter, probably," Prudence said with a laugh, thinking of their 3 energetic children. "Quieter," Benjamin agreed, "but so much emptier. You and the children, this life we've built, it's everything I didn't know I needed." Prudence leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to have nightmares about Webb finding me, about being forced to go back. Do you know when they stopped? When? Our wedding night. After we made our marriage real, I never had that nightmare again. I felt completely safe, completely free. You gave me that, Benjamin." "We gave it to each other," Benjamin corrected gently. "You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just surviving and building wealth. You gave me love and laughter and a reason to come home every day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie crickets singing, a distant coyote howling, the soft lowing of cattle in the pasture. "You think our story would have turned out differently if we'd waited longer to get married?" Prudence asked. "If we'd had a proper courtship," Benjamin considered this. "Maybe. Or maybe the speed of it was part of what made it work. We didn't have time to build up expectations or create false personas to impress each other. We just had to be honest and real from the start. We fell in love with who each other actually was, not who we pretended to be." "That's very wise," Prudence said. "When did you get so wise?" "I married a smart woman," Benjamin replied. "Some of it rubbed off." Prudence laughed and kissed him, a sweet, lingering kiss that still had the power to make Benjamin's heart race even after 10 years of marriage. As they finally went inside for the night, Benjamin paused to look back at the barn where it had all begun. The hayloft where Prudence had hidden that first night was dark now, filled only with hay and the occasional barn cat. But it would always be a special place to him, the spot where his life had changed forever. The Hayes family continued to thrive as the years rolled on. Benjamin's hair began to show threads of silver, and Prudence developed laugh lines around her eyes from years of smiling. Their children grew and eventually started families of their own, bringing grandchildren to fill the ranch with noise and joy. Thomas married a schoolteacher and took over the primary management of the ranch, working side by side with his father. Rebecca did become a doctor, one of the first women physicians in Kansas, and opened a practice in Great Bend. Daniel started his horse breeding operation and quickly gained fame for producing some of the finest cutting horses in the state. Through it all, Benjamin and Prudence remained the center of their family, the foundation on which everything else was built. They still worked the ranch together, though they delegated more to Thomas as they got older. They still sat on the porch every evening, weather permitting, talking and laughing and enjoying each other's company. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party in the church hall. The whole community turned out friends they'd made over the years, neighbors, business associates, and family. Reverend Matthews, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, stood to make a toast. 25 years ago, he said, a young man came to me with an unusual request. He wanted to marry a woman he'd just met, and he wanted to do it quickly. I had my doubts, I'll admit, but I performed the ceremony, and I'm happy to say it's been one of my better decisions. The crowd laughed. Benjamin and Prudence Hayes have shown us all what marriage can be when it's built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering commitment. They've raised 3 wonderful children, built a successful ranch, and contributed immeasurably to this community. But most importantly, they've loved each other well, and that love has been an inspiration to all of us. As the Reverend sat down to applause, Benjamin stood to respond. He looked at Prudence, who smiled up at him with eyes still as green and bright as the day he'd met her. I'm not much of a speaker, Benjamin began, so I'll keep this short. 25 years ago, I found a woman hiding in my hayloft. She was running from a fate she didn't want, looking for safety and freedom. I offered her both, and in return, she gave me a life richer than anything I could have planned or hoped for. Our story didn't start in the conventional way, and our courtship was about as short as a courtship can be. More laughter from the crowd. But what we built together has been strong and true and lasting. Prudence, you are my best friend, my partner, my love. Everything good in my life comes from the day you climbed down from that hayloft and into my heart. Here's to 25 more years, and may they be even better than the first 25. The party continued late into the night, but eventually Benjamin and Prudence slipped away, leaving their children to clean up and saying their goodbyes. They rode back to the ranch together in the wagon, with Prudence snuggled against Benjamin's side despite the warm summer night. That was quite a speech, Prudence said. You said you weren't much of a speaker. I had good material, Benjamin replied. It's easy to talk about something real and true. When they reached home, they went through the familiar routine of putting away the wagon and checking on the animals. Then, hand in hand, they walked to the barn. Want to see where it all started? Benjamin asked. They climbed up to the hayloft, moving more carefully than they had in their youth, but still agile enough. The loft was much as it had been that first night, hay bales stacked neatly, the smell of dried grass and horses, moonlight streaming through the gaps in the boards. I was so scared that night, Prudence remembered, settling onto a hay bale. I was exhausted and hungry and terrified that Webb would find me, and then I heard your voice and I thought my heart would stop. I thought you were a thief, Benjamin admitted, sitting beside her. Or maybe a lost traveler. I never imagined you were a beautiful woman running from a forced marriage. I never imagined you were the man I'd spend the rest of my life with, Prudence said. But the moment you offered me food instead of turning me in, I started to hope. And when you suggested we get married to protect me, I thought you were either the kindest man alive or completely crazy. Maybe both, Benjamin suggested. Prudence laughed and leaned against him. Definitely both. But I'm so glad you were. I'm glad you took a chance on a stranger in your hayloft. I'm glad we took a chance on each other. Best chance I ever took, Benjamin said, kissing the top of her head. They sat in the hayloft for a long time, remembering that first night and all the days and years that had followed. They remembered the fear and uncertainty, but also the hope and courage. They remembered falling in love so quickly it made their heads spin, getting married after knowing each other for such a short time, building a life together from almost nothing. And they remembered every moment that had come after the birth of their children, the growth of their ranch, the joys and sorrows of 25 years together. Every memory was precious, every moment a treasure. As the moon rose higher in the sky, they finally climbed down from the hayloft and went into the house. Their home, built with their own hands and filled with the evidence of their life together, photographs on the walls, children's drawings saved and framed, books they'd read together, furniture they'd chosen together. In their bedroom, the same room Prudence had slept in that first night, they prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of long marriage. Benjamin helped Prudence unpin her hair, just as he'd done on their wedding day, and she helped him with his collar studs. As they lay in bed together, Prudence said softly, "Thank you, Benjamin, for everything, for taking me in, for marrying me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." "Thank you," Benjamin replied, "for choosing to trust me, for making our house a home, for giving me children and grandchildren, for being my partner in everything. You are the greatest gift of my life, Prudence Hayes." They fell asleep holding hands as they had done for 25 years, as they would continue to do for years to come. The rest of their story unfolded as all good love stories do, with continued devotion, shared purpose, and abiding affection. They weathered the challenges that come with aging, supporting each other through illness and loss. They celebrated the victories of their children and grandchildren, always there with encouragement and love. Benjamin eventually retired fully from ranching, turning the operation over to Thomas, while he and Prudence spent their time traveling to visit Rebecca and Daniel, working in Prudence's garden and enjoying the slower pace of life. But they never stopped holding hands, never stopped their evening talks on the porch, never stopped loving each other with the same intensity they'd felt when Prudence first climbed down from that hayloft into Benjamin's life. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they renewed their vows in the same church where they'd first married. Reverend Matthews had long since passed, but his successor performed the ceremony with reverence and joy. Benjamin's voice was weaker now, roughened by age, but it was still firm as he spoke his vows. "I, Benjamin Hayes, recommit myself to you, Prudence Hayes, my wife of 50 years. You have been my companion, my love, my partner in all things. I thank God every day for the night you hid in my hayloft and changed my life forever." Prudence's eyes were misty as she responded, "I, Prudence Hayes, recommit myself to you, Benjamin Hayes, my husband of 50 years. You saved my life that night, but more than that, you showed me what love could be. These 50 years with you have been the greatest blessing of my life." They kissed to thunderous applause, and then danced their first dance as they had at their wedding reception so many years ago, moving slowly now, but with the same affection and joy. That night, as they sat on the porch of the house Benjamin had built more than 50 years earlier, Prudence said, "Did you ever imagine when you found me in that hayloft that we'd end up here? 50 years later, still together, still in love?" "No," Benjamin admitted. "I hoped we could build something good, but this exceeded my wildest dreams." "We've had a good life, haven't we?" "The best," Prudence confirmed. And it all started because you were kind enough to help a stranger in need. And because you were brave enough to run toward freedom instead of accepting a life you didn't want, Benjamin added. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out, listening to the sounds of their family inside making dinner and putting children to bed. The ranch that had once been Benjamin's solitary domain was now filled with life and love, all because of a chance encounter on a spring night in 1874. No regrets, Prudence asked, as she often did. Not a single one, Benjamin replied, as he always did. You. Only that we can't live it all over again, Prudence said with a smile. But then again, the first time was pretty perfect. It was, Benjamin agreed. 2 weeks from stranger to wife and a lifetime of love to follow, not a bad story. Not bad at all, Prudence said, leaning her head on his shoulder just as she had done countless times over the past 50 years. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Benjamin thought about the journey they'd taken together. It had started with a woman hiding in his hayloft, desperate and afraid. It had continued with a hasty marriage born of necessity but built on genuine affection. And it had blossomed into a love that had sustained them through 50 years of life's joys and sorrows. He thought about how easily he could have missed all of this, how he could have sent her away that first night, or how she could have hidden in someone else's barn, or how any number of small decisions could have prevented their paths from crossing. The improbability of it all amazed him. But it had happened. Against all odds they had found each other, and from that unlikely beginning they had built something beautiful and lasting and true. "What are you thinking about?" Prudence asked, sensing his reflective mood. "About how lucky we are," Benjamin said. "About how 1,000 small chances led us to each other, and how we made the most of every moment we've had together." "We're not done yet," Prudence reminded him. "We still have more moments to make." "You're right," Benjamin said, squeezing her hand. "So let's make them count." They stayed on the porch until the cool night air drove them inside, to the warm house filled with their family, to the life they had built together through love and trust and unwavering commitment to each other. And as they settled into bed that night, both knowing they were blessed beyond measure, they whispered the same words they had whispered to each other for 50 years. "I love you." "I love you too." 3 simple words, repeated countless times but never losing their meaning or their power. 3 words that had carried them through half a century of marriage, and would carry them through whatever time they had left. The woman who had hidden in the hayloft had found not just safety, but love, family, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. The man who had offered help to a stranger had found his soulmate, his partner, his purpose. 2 weeks from hiding in a hayloft to becoming his wife. 50 years from a hasty marriage to a golden anniversary. A lifetime of love built on the foundation of kindness, courage, and the willingness to take a chance on the unexpected. And as Benjamin drifted off to sleep with Prudence in his arms, as he had done for 50 years and would continue to do for the rest of his life, his last thought was the same one he'd had on their wedding night all those years ago. He was the luckiest man alive.